Chapter 3. The Heretics. Chapter Text. Chapter 3. The Heretics. The academy was boring, and his classmates lacked class. Vader was pacing briskly towards the flight simulator room, temper flaring at the thought crossing his mind. Since his arrival 6 months ago, he had tried his hardest not to choke anyone to death, but he was one hair away from relapsing, and it was all due to this stupid asshole Jang Sola. He was fighting so hard to rein in his vicious ways and pass as an exceptionally brilliant student, a poor orphan who fought all his life to fulfill his destiny and become the best pilot of the galaxy, but Jang would just not let go. He sat in one of the simulators, activating the combat mode immediately. He was supposed to study at the library for his midterm exams, but he already knew nearly everything, and the company was unpleasant, so he decided to leave. Vader brutally destroyed the advanced level of the simulator in a couple of minutes, and went at it again another 5 times before he started to feel a tiny bit better. His first reaction had been to touch his bond with Anya, but as far as he knew she was doing some sort of pilgrimage in a GD temple on Dantooine under Dooku's surveillance, and it felt childish to interrupt her meditations just to vent about a classmate. A noise on his left distracted him from the analysis of his sheath score, and he frowned. Ailey's. Perfect, the cherry on top of the rotten cake. He hated quite brightly Jang and his little goons, persuaded to be the center of the galaxy, and fixated on making him pay for being too good when his origins were modest. Scums. But as much as he hated the teenager, it held little face to his distaste for Ailey's. She was the most annoying being on Talorvin, by far, and her simple presence was making his skin crawl. "Oh, Khan, wow, you're so good," she whined, hands clasped near her face in what she wanted to be a demure yet admiring posture. "I wish I could be as good as you." He didn't dignify her with an answer and rose, shutting off the simulator before starting a tactical retreat toward the entrance of the academy. If he could not be at peace in either the library or the simulator room, then he would be going home, imposed study time be damned. Ailey trailed after him, yapping like an excited puppy, and he focused on Luke and how disappointed his son would be if he murdered his classmates to keep himself in control. Luke would take it all in stride with charm and class. Luke would give her polite smiles and reject her so softly she wouldn't even think about being mad about it. Luke would very much not decorate the corridor with her still warm insides, just because he didn't like the sound of her voice, and the slimy affection he could feel in the Force. But Sith hell, she was annoying. "Do you think you could train me after class one day?" She batted her eyelashes to draw moisture to her eyes, faking emotion. "Mrs. Farah thinks I might not pass my class because of the simulator. She says I am too easily distracted." You bet she was. She was a crippling menace on a ship, crashing at least twice a week in the simulator, and she was only allowed to stay because of her excellent theory skills. Not that he looked into it at all, but being forced to listen to her regularly gave him a keen insight into Ailey's talents. He kept going, praying silently for any type of distraction allowing him to escape from the talkative idiot, and ran to his vehicle. He kept the speeder, in the end. Anya had been gracious enough to purchase it from the landing bay when she returned with him to her ship. She'd spoken to the renter for a bit while he was waiting on the side, gazing longingly at the Black Beauty, and had given him the keys with a knowing smile. Under all the ice she was a decent person, and quite frankly their monthly chats via comlink were becoming increasingly useful to help him stay sane. And then Jang laughed at me and told me I was useless. "You don't think I'm useless, do you, Khan?" Ailey's mewed, cheeks pink and a bit out of breath from keeping up with him while delivering her long-winded speech. Jang was not wrong, and it pained him to have to admit it, even to himself. The idiot was still babbling loudly when he felt it. A signature near the landing pad. Intriguing. He opened himself a bit more to the Force to probe at the Force user, and was met with a weak but trained presence. Exactly what he expected, the heretics were coming for him. "Is it because you have a girlfriend?" Her lip quivered, eyes moist due to her excessive blinking once again. "I promise you, Khan, it is not like that at all. I just want to be your friend, you always seem so lonely." It was exactly like that, and the denial was not redeeming her in his eyes in the slightest bit, but he was too focused on the GD to care about Ailey's at the moment, and did not deem her worthy of an answer. A man, tall, muscular, with dark long hair and a goatee, in his 30s, was waiting at the academy entrance. The receptionist seemed to know him and nodded in his direction when Khan appeared. She flashed him a warm smile and interrupted the harpy. "Mr. Vader, I was about to calm you, someone wanted to speak to you." He nodded and walked toward the GD. Ailey's, obviously interrupted in her efforts and intimidated by the presence of both adults, chose a tactical retreat for this time, and went back into the corridor leading to the simulator room, for his greatest pleasure. Maybe this day was going to be less bad than planned, after all. The GD had a calm expression and seemed quite relaxed, if a bit excited to meet him. He introduced himself as Master Lun Suli, and after some rather useless small talk, suggested they continue their conversation at a cafe nearby. Vader was always in for food and drinks of any kind, still enjoying fully his brand new senses, and followed him without any opposition, which seemed to please him. He couldn't really see why following strangers around just because they were offering food and drinks was hardly proof of intelligence. Obi-Wan would have chastised him for hours if he had done something like that during his apprenticeship under him. Thankfully, Obi-Wan wasn't there, and Lun Su-Li obviously didn't uphold the same professional standards. He settled for a nice cup of caf and some Taurvinian sugary treats he was growing fond of, and waited for Lun Su-Li to start talking. He was obviously here to try to recruit him in his little cult, and that was exactly what Vader wanted. He could not, however, let him know that yet. "Have you ever heard about the Force, Khan?" he asked in a calm, kind voice that seemed to perfectly match with his personality. Vader tried very hard not to roll his eyes, and replied in what he hoped to be a naive and eager voice. "A bit. It's the GD power, right?" Sully smiled, feeling like amusement and soft, mushy compassion. "It's a bit more complicated than that, let me explain it shortly." Vader endured about 5 to 10 minutes of Force theory, most of it inaccurate and nearly blasphemous for someone as knowledgeable about the Force as he was. He finished his first cup of caf and ordered a second, looking for something to distract himself with, as his right eye twitched painfully each time Lun Su-Li said something particularly untrue. The older man seemed to finish his explanation, at last, and smiled at him again. He did not return it. "You must wonder why I swept you from school to talk about the Force," he asked kindly. Vader repressed an exasperated sigh, determined to play nicely. If he wanted to join Lun Su-Li's merry cult, he had to at least pretend for a while that he was completely ignorant about anything GD related. "A bit. Is it because I have it?" The GD nodded. "Yes, your abilities already influence you, with piloting for example." "Is this why I find it so easy?" Vader asked, cringing internally. "Yes," he said, "warm and bright and insufferable, and with training, you will find other areas where the Force is your ally." "Are you offering me training?" Su-Li shook his head, dark eyes glinting with mirth. "Not me per se, our temple do not function this way, but if you are interested, then we offer to train you, yes." "What would a baby GD ask?" Vader let his face darken, though his lower lip most certainly did not tremble. "Does that mean I have to give up the academy?" "No, not at all," Su-Li replied, holding his hands up in a pacifying gesture. "You will have to pass a small test, nothing to worry about, and we will then define with you sometimes during the week when you can come to the temple. The academy is already aware, they were the ones who contacted us." "Fine. When do you want to do this test?" Vader hadn't wanted to be so curt, but he was starting to get really tired of this entire fake conversation, and he had finished his pastries. "Well, if you want to, we can go to the temple right now. As I said, it is really a routine check, nothing you would need preparation for." "Okay, then let's go." It might have come out a bit too much like an order, but the GD seemed to take it as eagerness. "Good." He paid, they rose, then made their way to the temple Lun Su-Li had spoken about. They did not even require a speeder, it was ridiculously close to the academy, and to be honest, a bit tacky too. The outside looked exactly like any other building in Alasia, minus a small golden pyramid near the front doors, but the inside definitively lacked the quaint and airy feeling most Taurvinians seemed to favor. It was all cream marbles, dark woods, heavy gold details and ceilings covered in paintings. He was reminded for a while of a mutant hybrid child between Theet's royal palace on Naboo, and Palpatine's questionable aesthetics for the Imperial Palace. Distasteful. He was led to a large foyer with a high ceiling decorated with 2 tall statues of a man and a woman that must serve as some sort of ceremonial room. It could be exited by 4 arched doors excluding the one they entered from. Sully pushed the opening button of the one on the far left to reveal a small training room with soft floors and various weapons on the walls. The room was bathed in the afternoon light by tall windows, and was separated by transparent steel panels from some sort of meditation garden. Nice enough, and more his style. The GD sat on the floor and motioned for Vader to imitate him. He obliged, curious to the test Sully would have him take, and sat in front of him. The box flew before them, full of toys probably meant for children, and Vader felt his insides liquefy, mortified at the idea that he was about to undergo a variant of the same stupid stuff they made him do before he became a Padawan. Recognizing hidden objects, making them fly if possible, and possibly letting the GD probe at his mind to feel his emotions. Wonderful. Perfect. They began with the guesses, easy. He saw a crate dragon, a lothwolf, a fathier and some miniature spaceship. Test done. Then Sully told him to try and make any of the objects move. He settled for the dragon and made it roll pitifully on his side. The GD was delighted. Pathetic. Anakin had been a supernova in the Force, shining brighter than anyone he had ever met, his power unrivaled. His rare defeats were due to his poor strategic skills at the time, and sometimes his arrogance, never a lack of power. Vader had terrorized the galaxy for decades, his unrestrained use of the dark side, allowing him to perform feats most actual council members would think of as mere fantasies, a black shadow with an ominous breath, predatory and inspiring horror in his enemies. Khan had a functional body, a healthier relationship with the Force, and 4 decades of experience using it, either for the light or the dark side. He was not going to jump around like an overjoyed toddler, because he made the crate dragon toy move. In his hubris, he half considered the idea of going to Tatooine to tame some real crate dragons and have them around to assert his power, but quickly gave up. The beasts had a nasty temper and a tendency to eat way too much meat to be considered good pets. A shame. It's encouraging, Khan, the GD said, smiling gently yet again. Softy. With a bit of training your abilities should develop nicely. If you allow me, I will do a brief mind check, nothing too special, this is just a routine probe, you'll probably not feel anything. Of course he was going to feel it. Oh, well, ignorance was bliss, he supposed, and it definitely served his design. He nodded. Go ahead. Vader moved his shield around slightly, arranging for a steady, balanced flow of energy to bathe his quiet mind. Contrary to the man's poor thinking, he was well able to sense his unrefined probing around his mind, and allowed a few fleeting memories to trickle out. His annoyance when Zhang teased him on his lack of parents and poor origins, his satisfaction in the flight simulator, his curiosity for the GD. All genuine, all curated to fit with his current age and background, carefully leaving out the constant ruminations about the past and future, and frequent violent thoughts that polluted his mind. Unsully smile, his thin lips revealing perfectly aligned white teeth, his dark eyes glinting. Well, Khan, you passed all the tests. If you still want to be trained, we hold sessions every evening from 1800 until 2100. There are 5 teachers, including me, and we alternate between theory and practice to keep things interesting. If you want to come outside of the sessions, this room and the garden are open at all times, first come first served. Thank you, Master Sully, he replied, not even bothering to hide his satisfied smile. I'll try to pass by once or twice a week. Sounds good. I'm sure you'll make quick friends with the group, they're all very nice. I hope so. Like he gave a damn. He was lowering himself to attend some weird kind of tutoring group for struggling Force-sensitive kids, dreaming of being GD led by heretics, rejected by the Order for their lenient views on nearly every rule they were supposed to abide by. The thought made his skin crawl. Even with his distaste for the Order and their rules, the idea of associating himself with those one-up GD with zero self-control was painful. Still, it was a plan, and it was progress. Li spent an uncomfortable amount of time reassuring him that he would be nicely integrated, and that his powers were nothing to be shy of. He seemed to be resentful of the GD Order, who never agreed upon officially knighting his poor students, and justified it by invoking beliefs divergence. Fine, if that was what he wanted to call it, Vader was not going to stop him from trashing the council, even if he personally thought that these beliefs divergence from the Order were very much justified. He finished his little speech by telling him they were still able to build their own lightsaber when they were ready for it, not that Vader would have any trouble building one by himself, and let him go with mild apologies for being so talkative. Khan bid him goodbye as soon as he could do so without looking rude and out of character, then fled toward his speeder and returned swiftly at home, finally able to roll his eyes as he thought back on his very annoying day. On Dantooine, Anya was enjoying a quick spar with her uncle in between her meditations. The whole planet was pulsating with life, begging her to listen, to taste, to scent, to see everything it had to offer. Beautiful, but dangerously distracting. She quickly wiped her sweaty forehead and assumed her stance again, ready for another pass. The Dooku had been quite similar to what she remembered, but with her knowledge of the future, it was now easier to see how darkness was slowly consuming him. He was rough, sometimes, callous, and he did not tolerate failure with as much grace as he did in the past. He pushed her a tad too much when they trained, almost impatient, and she knew exactly why. He needed an apprentice, someone to train in the dark side, and she was still not powerful enough to satisfy his master's designs. The first time, he eventually pressured her enough to awaken her powers, and then tried to help her master them. She had accidents upon accidents, unable to tame the raw and chaotic energy newly awakened, until he finally decided to lock her up in Sereno's citadel under force-suppressing binds, and to definitely replace her with a Sag Ventress. The young Night Sister he had been silently using as his personal assassin and training on the side. He had told her it was for her own good and oriented her towards internal politics, but the betrayal had still stung, and they had drifted further apart, as time went by until he got himself decapitated, and she got transferred from Sereno to the Imperial Palace, as Palpatine's brand new toy. She did not want to even think about the Imperial Palace. The only good thing that came out of that wretched place was that she finally learned how to control her powers. She broke her usual defensive Saressa stance for a couple of Makashi strikes to please him, then reverted back to her favorite form, happy with dragging on the exchange for a couple more minutes. Dooku finally disarmed her with a quick fling of his wrist, and they bowed. Sulla, she panted, slowly recovering her breath. That was good, he stated, looking as though they had been braiding grass for half an hour, and not sparring at high speed. Don't open your feet too much when parrying though, I could have passed your guard easily a couple of times. She tried to smile, it came out stiff and sweaty. Thank you, uncle. I have a call with Joikin, Dooku told her, frowning lightly. You can stay here and meditate until dinner. I will. He clipped his lightsaber on his belt and looked at her with narrowed eyes. We will be departing tomorrow. Anya nodded and he left for his ship. Dooku was concerned with her, she could feel it, but he refused to address it. She knew he found her behavior strange. She was more closed off than before, more focused on herself and less on pleasing him, and he couldn't pinpoint the reason for her sudden leap in maturity. From what she had gathered from his careful line of questions, he believed something happened to her on Towervin, something significant enough to affect her whole behavior. She wasn't trying to prove him wrong, dropping some hints that her discussions with Prince Levi had been enlightening. He probably thought she had a silly crush on him, and was trying to prove herself worthy of the condescending core world prince. It didn't matter, as long as she could worm her way out of becoming his apprentice and into more galactic politics without being discovered, she was okay with it. Pushing the thoughts away, she crossed the ruins of the ancient GD enclave that once stood on the green and lush planet, and sat down before a thundering waterfall, feeling little drops of water, refreshing her sweaty face. She closed her eyes and opened herself to the Force once more, feeling the habitual tingling as the powerful energy thrummed in her veins and pushed her towards the galaxy. Carefully she let herself drift in the Force, letting go of her emotions and thoughts to focus on aligning with the energy. After a couple of minutes she started to hear whispers and noises. She checked that her uncle was still on the ship, and he was, before letting herself go a bit deeper, feeling herself being immersed in the Force as one plunged in deep fresh water. The whispers were louder now, the noises too, and she could start seeing seemingly unrelated scenes from different planets, echoes of life and death from the whole galaxy. Her fingers were tingling again, the sensation stronger now, and she could picture the threads of destinies around her, hers to play with. One of them, bigger, made of platinum and dark smoke, and something unnatural she identified as future or unlive, connected herself to Vader. She let it aside, unwilling to touch it when Dooku was that close, and took a mental step back to get a picture of the whole. It was a pulsating mass, tangled and messy and alive, filled with impressions and voices and memories. Connections. She cleared her mind as much as she could and projected in the Force, asking where she was needed, where her help would do the most good. The Force warmed her core, spreading like liquid fire in her veins, embracing her with a strong warmth she hadn't felt in decades, and answered. A natural fire smoke Valorum's distressed face, a battle GD's funerals, the smell of burnt corpse being returned to the Force, a planet that became a prison. The threads were moving like snakes now, whispering warnings and threats against changing anything too significant, begging her to let the present flow as intended, to stay on pattern. She pulled on her power and made them go quiet, annoyed by their inference, and promised the Force to upset the least amount of patterns that she could. Her vow rang true, echoing into the energy like a series of music notes before the threads, appeased, went back to their original state. She smiled and pulled herself out of the trance slowly, careful not to upset the balance of energy that made her float a few centimeters above the ground too strongly. The waterfall seemed louder now, closer. She exhaled and shut off her connection, letting the energy trickle through just enough to keep herself in control, then opened her eyes. Anya stayed seated, taking a moment to gather herself before rising and hiking back to their ship. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows and pink lights on the ruins of the ancient GD temple. She gave a last prayer to the beautiful Nexus scrawling peacefully beneath her feet, before entering the shiny shuttle her uncle used for his personal flights, and smiled when it purred against her in return, satisfied by their interactions. She had gained a lot of insights in the last few days, all pointing towards possible paths to influence events to her benefit, without disturbing the future she knew too much. Dooku took her here to strengthen her in the Force, and further her desire to walk in his path. It worked the first time. Dantooine was a powerful place, and her bridled abilities had flourished there. Now, it served another purpose by allowing her to refine their plans, and attune herself with the flow of the present galaxy. She was still very much an intruder here, and during her first few months, the Force had rejected her influence, casting any attempts at making different choices astray, and making her life overall difficult. Vader had suffered similar issues, though his natural strength was usually enough to power his way through, despite the hindrance caused by the Force. It was slowly getting better though. They were starting to connect with their environment, making bonds, creating memories and anchoring themselves in this time. Hopefully, the progress she made here on Dantooine would prove to be significant enough to grant her partial success in her future endeavors. Her uncle had already ordered their protocol droid to set the table and prepare dinner. She smiled at him and sat in front of a plate of traditional Serenian stew originating from Corania they were both fond of. The strong aroma was making her salivate, but she knew better than to eat before Dooku himself started. He picked up his fork, sliced a piece of meat, and she herself reached for her utensils. I hope this journey was enlightening, my niece Dooku began with, watching her with shrewd eyes over his glass of wine. Very much so, uncle. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come, she replied, trying not to sound robotic and failing. Luckily, he didn't seem to take outrage at her stilted words. It is my duty as your teacher to show you those places, even if Dantooine does not particularly align with my personal strengths. Have you gained any insights from your meditations? Time to sound mysterious and confused. I asked where I could do the most good and was shown something unusual. Oh? Could you describe it? he asked, acting politely surprised when his eyes were dissecting her every move. She tried to feign even more confusion, and let out a tiny frustrated sigh. Vague impressions at best, but I recognized Chancellor Valorum and an impression of chaos surrounding him. I am not sure how to interpret it though. Should I try to get closer to the Chancellor, the Senate, or maybe Coruscant itself? Am I meant to solve a problem, or will my presence create this chaos? I am afraid the Force wasn't particularly clear. As such, I am unsure of the path to take. What would you recommend? Daka munched a few seconds on a perfectly cooked vegetable, reflecting on her questions. She had disturbed him, she knew that. Valorum needed to fall for his master's plans to unfold, and involving Anya could turn dangerous. Then again, if she was meant to create the chaos and push the Chancellor on his way out, his master would be most pleased. Anya smiled internally, enjoying his conflict with an unhealthy amount of cruelty. Her personal interpretation went much deeper than what she told him, and the vision was not nearly as unclear as she made it out to be. Not that could tell him, he needed to be given the impression of choice. It was incredibly important to diffuse his suspicions. Would you appreciate spending more time on Coruscant? I know you are well acquainted with a couple of senators, and observing politics from up close might be a valuable experience. Force impressions or not, he offered, watching intently how she responded to his bait. Anya lowered her gaze demurely, the picture-perfect young princess put in front of a tough choice. I am unsure. I would not want to let you down. I know how much you invested in my training. He waved her concerns off. Your training is nearly complete. There are not many things I can teach you anymore, not without being your true master and taking you with me on missions. I'm not keen on battles, she whispered, cheeks tinged pink in fake shame. Daka rose a brow. I am aware. Your connection with the Force is strong, but does not serve you in combat. I had a feeling, however, that you held no love for politics. Anya needed to hammer it down. This was the best shot she had gotten since she got back. She could not screw this up. Breathing deeply, she centered herself and aimed for an insecure yet eager tone. Well, I don't particularly like politicians. I am starting to enjoy the art itself. Sereno is thriving, thanks to you. I would like to contribute, she finished in a whisper, if you judge me adequate. He stayed silent for a few moments, contemplating his decision, then took a sip of wine before answering her. Very well, then it is settled. After the fundraising on Jellican, you will go to Sullust. Their pilot academy needs funding and they requested an audience. If you succeed in negotiating good terms for Sereno, I will send you to Coruscant as a junior legislator. Our current senator will teach you all he knows. He will retire next year. If you prove yourself, you will replace him. She frowned. And Chancellor Valorum? Leave him alone for now, he replied, seemingly annoyed at her question. Spending time on Coruscant will refine your feelings and point you in the right direction. Anya smiled, exuding gratefulness by each pore of her skin. Thank you, Uncle Yan. You don't realize how much your trust means to me. He smiled, and for an instant she was 16 again, preening under his kind eyes. She felt some relief coming from him, and understood he was happy that she expressed a wish to drift off the apprentice path, even if he would never admit it. Parts of him were still good, she knew it, and those precious shards of her beloved Uncle Yan shone brighter this evening. They finished their meal in silence, comfortable enough with each other to avoid baseless chit-chat if they had nothing to say, but before retreating to her cabin, she indulged in one childish act to celebrate her victory, and maybe help the light claim a little more of Yan Dooku. She hugged him and told him she loved him. He seemed hesitant at first, unsure of what to do, but eventually he hugged her back, his scent both familiar and foreign, and whispered into her blonde hair. Be careful, my niece, attachments are dangerous for people like us. Anya smiled against his shoulder, only a tiny bit bitter, because she knew exactly how dangerous her attachment to him had been in the past, and relished in the moment, enjoying his warm embrace for the first time in more than 30 years. Vader was making great progress. The heretics, they called themselves the Shans, which he personally found hilarious, had been increasingly impressed by his abilities in the Force, as planned, and he had already heard Lun Su Li whispering about lineage and prophecies to one of the other master during one of his training. Foolish little GD, so easy to trick for an old recovering Sith like him. His midterm exams at the academy were met with the same amount of outstanding success, impressing his teachers into letting him into more advanced classes. If everything went well, and it would, he would graduate in 2 years instead of 3, and he couldn't say he wasn't pleased. He typed absent-mindedly on his datapad the few details from his advanced engineering class that seemed relevant with a bored air, and felt Zhang get impatient in the Force. The annoying prick was in most of his classes, and had similarly benefited from an advancement after the midterms. Apparently, he was second of their initial promotion after him, and quite well acquainted with influential Talravinians. He had been consistently looking for a fight since the start of the new term 2 days ago, and seemed to be at the end of his very limited patience. Vader wanted to kill him, but he knew it would stain his stay at the academy, and he did not want anyone to find out anything suspicious on his background, outside of what he had leaked himself, when he would join Anya later on. Still, surely it was normal for any students to have a few enemies in their classes. Maybe he could retaliate, at least a bit. Make him fall down a flight of stairs or carefully throwing a pencil right in his eye would already be gratifying at this point. His thoughts derailed from the frustrating teenager to Anya, and a wave of concern washed over him. She had made her move for Coruscant, and Dooku had obliged. Still, he did not trust even one toenail of the old Sith Lord, and from her tale, her actions had been bold. How much of that had been disclosed to Sidious? Will it slip under his radar, or would he look closer into it, intrigued by the suddenly calm and collected Countess who abruptly chose a civilian career over exploring the Force? Then again, Sidious had a lot on his plate, plotting the next blow to Valorum's desecrated rule, the invasion on Naboo. Maybe there was a chance that this would slip through his radar, disregarded as teenage anxiety he had no patience for. Vader's eyes narrowed. There was something he wasn't seeing, something they missed in their plans. What was it? Palpatine had pushed for the Trade Federation to organize a blockade over Naboo in order to be elected Chancellor. Valorum had honestly not been the best one the Senate had known, much more a paper pusher than a leader, and still he had been re-elected when Palpatine could have campaigned. Why? Was Palpatine afraid to come closer in contact with the GD at this point in time? Wasn't he powerful enough to withstand their scrutiny? He had done so for years afterward. It did not seem impossible. Unless... Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? Darth Plagueis had once remarked that the Force can strike back. Ironic. He could save others from death, but not himself. Criff. He needed to speak to Anya. Focusing inward, he tugged at the bond, a thin thread giving their physical distance, and made it echo 3 short times, signifying he needed to discuss something with her that could not wait until their next planned call. She rang back 2 times and he agreed with the last tug. Good, she would calm him in 2 hours. He would just need to find a place to talk to her alone. Looking at the chrono, Vader sighed impatiently. This could be a major breakthrough and significant help to their plans, and he had the displeasure of having to suffer through his boring engineering class for another hour and a half. The call would happen during his lunch break. How pitiful was that? Frustrated, he started typing furiously on his datapad, not vague notes on the class anymore, but bits and pieces he started to connect in a legitimate plan. His jaw set, eyes focused, he explored possibilities, evaluated resources, timelines, and possible setbacks. If the tiny Anakin Skywalker that was currently an 8-year-old reckless slave child on dusty Tatooine had seen his future self, he would have been gobsmacked. Planning was very much not his thing. Perhaps Anya had been a good influence on that particular front. With his mind on an interesting task, for once, engineering went much faster than expected. Zhang tried to corner him afterward, but he avoided him and grabbed a quick pita sandwich from the cafeteria, before retreating to one of the isolated study rooms in the library. It was small, but it was private enough, and there was little chance that he would be disturbed during his call. Plus, if they wanted to know what he was doing here, he would just be a student in the library. Nothing strange. Anya called with an encrypted frequency when he was finishing his sandwich. Hey Khan. Why the sudden call? The holo showed she was wearing some type of elaborate dress that looked burned for some reason. Weird. He wiped his mouth while swallowing the last bits of his food before he replied. I came across a disturbing conclusion this morning, and I will require your help. Why does your dress look burnt? I am heading to Gala. The aim is to raise awareness to several mid and outer rim planets, currently in crisis due to natural disasters. I was picked to represent Coyerty, who is suffering from severe forest fires, she replied, mouth twisted in a displeased pout. Clearly, the burnt dress hadn't been her first choice. It's organized by the committee you joined. Sir, yes. A lot of other junior legislators are going to be there, and a few senators. She straightened and scratched her arm, visibly uncomfortable in the garment. What do you need my help with? I believe Darth Plagueis is still alive at the moment. Sidious will need to kill him before his ascension, but I don't believe he will until he trusts small enough to be revealed to the GD. In 1 year and a half then, during the Naboo invasion. It still doesn't answer my question, she retorted, annoyed either by his response or by the scratchy dress. I want to be the one who kills him, Vader droned, refusing to express any feeling about the matter. Anya raised a brow. Why? Isn't it good to let Sidious do it? I'm starting to believe there is more to the rule of 2 than I understood. To become a true master you must kill another. Why? He asked, gaining her full, rapt attention. Power, she whispered. That's also what I think. If I kill him, this power will forever be lost to Sidious, Vader stated. He knew very well that killing wasn't the only condition to fulfill in order to become a master. Palpatine had mocked him enough for losing the ability when he burnt on Mustafar, but Anya had no need to hear anything about it. This was a Sith secret. But the Force might retaliate if you change something this significant. I don't believe it will. Plagueis played with the law of nature, he created life from the Force. He was arrogant in his power, I don't believe he ever gave back. Anya hummed in assent. Then it might even favor you for righting this wrong, as it had favored Sidious in the first place. I will need a ship in my costume. Criffus sounded ridiculous. He caught her smiling, and narrowed his eyes threateningly. You already know on which planet he is. she asked with amused eyes, graciously avoiding any unwanted comment. At first I thought Coruscant, but Plagueis is immune. They don't usually frequent the capital all that much, and both his and Sidious's powers would have been difficult to shield from the GD. Then where? Tatooine. Tatooine. Why? Anakin Skywalker. I will have to meditate to make sure, but if my guesses are true, there is no place he would rather be at the moment. Anya seemed on the verge of asking for more details, but didn't. Okay. I'll organize it and calm you the hangar number later. When do you want to go? This weekend if possible. We have an additional day off for some ridiculous Talravinian tradition. 3 days should be enough to make the trip, kill him and come back. She nodded. Fine. Keep me updated and calm. Yes? Stay safe, she asked, her voice laced with worry. Sidious loved to drone about Plagueis. I doubt he will be an easy foe. I will. I'll calm you when it's done. Thank you. Vader felt himself smile as she ended the call and took a second to school his features back to careful neutrality. The more time passed in their new present, the more he started to like her. She was the only link he had with his true self, and the only one with who he could really be himself in this timeline. Even if he tried to dismiss it, it mattered, and the feeling of companionship she invoked was pleasant. Their bond pulsed happily, satisfied by their brief interaction, and he was about to roll his eyes at such blatant sentimentality, when he saw movement on the edge of his vision. Jang. He had been looking at him through the tiny square window on the door. Criffy was annoying. What had he seen? Did he get to look at Anya? Did he recognize her? No, it was very unlikely. Jang was extremely self-centered and considered most off-worlders with contempt. He would not be cultivated enough to be able to recognize the relatively unknown Countess Dooku. Still, it was a clear breach of privacy, and he did not like the idea of Jang seeing him talking to Anya and being himself. He must have seen him smile. No one had seen him truly smile on Talravin yet. Sith hell, this was embarrassing. He gathered his things, still frowning. His next class was Advanced Galactic Physics, and it was one of the only ones that was genuinely interesting. He would try not to dwell either on Jang or on Plagueis during the 2 hours it would last. Unsurprisingly, though, Jang was waiting for him with 3 of his goons in front of their classroom. Annoying, again. Should he just force-choke them all? He could pretend it was a nut allergy, and there were no cameras. No. Using the Force to end those barely sapient assholes would be sacrilege, and he could already see Luke's disappointed face if he learned of his pointless murder spree. No, he should just remain calm and collected. When he would find Plagueis, he could express all of his Sith homicidal tendencies and assuage his anger issues, but in the meantime, his cover was worth more than his ego. Sue, Khan the orphan, he mocked. Seems like some lady hasn't yet realized how much of a poor and uncultivated disappointment you are. Where is she from? Oh, don't tell me. If she is willing to even speak with you, she must be from one of those outer rim backorder planets. He was reciting the Sith code backward to avoid lashing out. This was childish and unwarranted, a true testimony of the boy's maturity. He could sense jealousy underneath the taunting. For all his tongue, Jang never got to the dating stage with any girl yet, and being bested yet again by Khan did not sit well with him. Vader gloated internally, thoughts tainted with contempt. He had gone a lot farther than the dating stage with the girl. Hell, he had 23-year-old twins with his wife. This teenager bantha crap was far behind him now. Any amusement he felt soon died. Like his wife did. Remembering the past now was a low blow to inflict on himself, and a clear threat to his ability to react in a proper way to the interaction. Oh come on, farmer boy. Not even a reaction when I insult your girlfriend. Jang laughed, turning to his goons to get their attention before the last part of his detestable show. I saw your face earlier, so eager to please her, like a little puppy rolling over for his master. Darth Vader had never thought he could despise anyone more than he had despised Tarkin or Krennic, but this kid was rising through the rank of his most hated list at light speed. Still, he would not lower himself to his level. He schooled his expression in a mask of cold indifference and started walking again, intent on entering the classroom. The class is about to start. He heard a couple of girls swoon when he spoke and resisted rolling his eyes. Seriously, his behavior was cold, aloof, and he never spoke to anyone outside of imposed social interactions. How could they like it? Girls were weird. At least as Darth Vader, this whole hormonal teenager thing had been a lot less annoying. He could count on his fingers the number of suitors who had dared to pursue him. None had survived past the point of declaring their flames. Idiots. He tried his best to listen during the class, taking useful notes and answering the teacher's questions when they were directed to him, but darted towards his speeder as soon as the day was over. He had a Sith Lord to kill, and if he had one more interaction with Jang today, he was going to snap his scrawny little neck. Khan drove too fast, as per usual, and headed home. Usually, he would pass by the temple for the evening lecture, but he wanted to meditate on Darth Plagueis' location, and doing so at the temple was a bad idea for several reasons, mostly because his type of dark meditation would certainly leave any master present with a ton of questions he wasn't going to answer. When he entered, he closed the blinds, plunging the cozy apartment in darkness. He then went to the bedroom to retrieve his lightsaber from the hidden safe in the wall, and returned to the living room to sit cross-legged on the plush cream carpet that covered a fair chunk of the floor. He activated the lightsaber and let it float in front of his face. Then, carefully, he closed his eyes and opened himself to the Force. Vader's meditative landscape had changed a lot since Luke managed to turn him back to the light, even if it still fluctuated quite a bit, depending on how deep he was in either the dark or the light. Currently, the ocean he pictured was dark but placid, even if he could feel some dangerous currents below the peaceful surface, traces of his earlier agitation. The sky though was not as cloudy as usual. The suns were shining, reflecting gorgeous purple, green and blues lights on the summer waters. All around him tiny blue butterflies flew, fluttering happily in the sunlight while above him, an enormous white bird was soaring, performing the most incredible acrobatics. Luke. He let himself smile and made a sign to the bird who rewarded him with a delighted thrill that rang through his entire being, and chased the resonances of his dark feelings for Jan. He quit his own space with regrets and dove below the water, seeking connection with the dark side of the Force. The energy met him, curious and delighted, whispering how happy it was to have him back, how many great things they could do together. He felt it wrap around his shoulders in a cold embrace, purring against him like a satisfied lover seeking even more attention. Khan gritted his teeth and pushed through before it could twist anything, imposing his question on the Force. Where was Plagueis? The power churned, caressing his scales and trailing along his spine until two tendrils licked at his temple, feeding him a vision of Plagueis' exact location. The Rakata Temple on Tatooine. Very appropriate, all things considered. He kicked up, the lush water becoming heavy oil as he tried to emerge from the dark presence, and got off with a promise to use his dark abilities soon, and what he translated as a very sharp smile from the Force. When he got above the ocean, the bird sang again, cleaning his soul with something that sounded a lot like a reprimand from a concerned parent. Amused, he entertained it for a couple of minutes, enduring his fussing energy without complaint, before exiting his mind space and turning his lightsaber off. Khan looked at the chrono on the wall and saw the suns had already set. He had stayed there for 6 hours. He felt rested, maybe a little hungry. He tightened his mental shield with a sigh, careful to hide his Force presence again, and present only mediocre to medium-level abilities. He then rose, feeling his legs protest from being seated in the same position for hours, and hid his lightsaber before retreating to the kitchen for a late snack before bed. He grabbed his datapad in passing, reviewing his notes while chewing on a ration bar, because he was too lazy to cook. Anya had sent her the coordinates of the hangar she will send the ship to, and an encrypted file with notes on what she remembered about Plagueis. Nice touch. He read through it quickly, adding useful information to his own notes as he went, and went through 2 cups of tea, before deciding to turn in for the night. Plagueis was a mutant, and a clever one. He had been behind a lot of the plans Palpatine benefited from, a careful thinker. He was old, though. Old, weak, and full of hubris, so convinced of his own power over the Force that he forgot the Force had no master, and cared little for those who offended it. If he was right, if it was Plagueis, well, then it was personal.